Welcome to the Community Builder Podcast. The world is our classroom, and every moment is an opportunity to understand human connection at a newer level. On this podcast, we'll explore the minds of active community builders as they strive to leave their imprint on the world. I am your host, Travis King. Let's build. Before we get started, we would like to thank our sponsor, Cruise Control Music, the ultimate audio branding experience. Cruise Control Music creates custom, authentic sounds and music to showcase your brand identity and is a direct reflection of your vision, goals, and values. If you're looking to start or level up your podcast experience, log on to cruisecontrolmusic.com.
Yeah, thank you so much for reaching out. I'm super passionate about community, so I'm really excited to talk to you.
Of course. And, I was very interested just in your background and also just like what Hashicorp is up to. So I thought, your experience and perspective would be super valuable for people to hear, mainly because of all the amazing things that Hashicorp is doing, just from an expertise and industry perspective, but then also just like hearing what it's like building a community in that in such a new space. So definitely super excited to dive in with you.
Yeah, same. So just a little bit about my background. My name is Jana. I've been doing community management probably for about 8 years now. I've had the privilege of working at companies like Engine Yard, which was a Ruby on Rails hosting platform, company called StackMob that was in like the mobile developer space. And prior to Hashicorp, I was a company called New Relic that did application performance monitoring. And I, for some reason, over the years have seemed to find my niche. And I like doing like community management for developer communities, which I absolutely enjoy. That's just a little bit about me. And then, Hashicorp. So for folks that aren't familiar with Hashicorp, we're a technology company, surprise, and we build really popular infrastructure automation tools. And we started out, all of our tools were open source. For those of you that don't know, that means that they were free to download. And all of our stuff is still available for download on GitHub. Some of our most popular tools are, Vagrant was the first one that our founders ever built. Another popular tool is Terraform, and then Vault. And now last year we launched enterprise versions of our products. So we also make money too.
That's always good, right?
Yeah, totally. And my role there, so I've been there, almost 4 years now. And I'm the director of events and experiential marketing at Hashicorp. And so what that means is my team's responsible for a lot. So we're responsible for what I call our like global brand experiences. So it's our big like HashiConf, which is our annual user conference, Hashi Days, which are very like regional developer focused conferences. My team also does all of our internal cultural events. We do experiential and spatial design. We do a webinar program, social media, community management, or aspects of community management, like our Hashicorp user group program, which I'll dive into. We manage swag, regional marketing, trade shows, and when you work at a startup, anything else that gets thrown at you. So those are things my team and I do.
Interesting. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And how large is your team?
There's 4 of us right now.
4 humans doing all of this.
Yeah, it's actually, we make it work, right? It's funny. So the company as a whole has like clearly defined principles and how we operate as a company. And then my team also, like we have our own principles as to like how we operate. And that, which allows us to then move really quickly. So some of our principles are #GetShitDone. So it's like the ability to move really quickly, on brand. So everything that we deliver must fit the Hashicorp brand, always produce polished work. Yes, attitude, desire to learn. So we have our own like principles and just like the processes that we put in place using something like Asana for project management, having clearly defined like how we work, how we use Slack versus Dropbox versus Asana. So we operate really quickly with a small team.
No, that's awesome. I think that's definitely the mentality to have nowadays with, the way that things are changing. So no, I love that. Um, awesome. So in terms of like how communities played a role in the growth of HashiCorp, I guess could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, happily. I mean, so community, if I think of anything else that we do as a company, community and being really like highly engaged and active with our community members is our top priority. This is something that's been ingrained in the HashiCorp culture from the very beginning. So I started at HashiCorp. I started working with HashiCorp when we were 7 employees, and even from back then, right? All the engineers and the founders were focused on community building. So that meant we were really actively engaged in where our community members were and where they were having conversations. Right. So GitHub was a big place that we were constantly following along on issues and when people were submitting pull requests or having questions. Google Groups, people are really active in our Google Groups, so we're always in there and active. Twitter is really big for us. I think what's really beautiful even now, so HashiCorp's about 330 employees. And even now you see our founders every day communicating with our community on Twitter. So it's beautiful to see. And the way we communicate with our community, it's something that, again, this has been ingrained in our culture. How we communicate is also defined, right? So we as a company have very defined principles of how we work together, how we engage with our community and our customers, how we engage with each other internally. And some of our principles are integrity, kindness, humility, communication, and people really feel it, right? This is from when it was just Mitchell and Armand, our two founders. These are principles that they defined very early on. That has then translated into how we hire people and how we communicate with our community. Another thing that we did really well from the very beginning is we documented on how we should communicate. So we have a document that's our writing style guide, right? So anyone, I had access to Twitter, all of the engineers had access to Twitter, support tickets, things like that. But we clearly defined, hey, this is our writing style guide that everyone in the company needs to use. So even if it was different people engaging with the community, it was very clear that, okay, because of our principles, this is how we should be engaging with people. And this is also the type of language we should be using. So community is huge for HashiCorp. And again, we started out in open source, right? All of our stuff is open source. So we have our community is really highly engaged and massive, right? We've had over millions of downloads of all of our open source tools, and we have hundreds of thousands of community members actively using our tools in staging or in production. So the community's there, right?
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and definitely want to dive really just a little bit deeper in what you said about when HashiCorp had 7 employees and the founders still found a way to make community a priority. Because oftentimes I find that when talking with companies, the community teams, typically they're still struggling to get budget or get buy-in or prove ROI. So I guess could you talk a little bit about how rooting HashiCorp's founding principles and community, ultimately led to being this now larger company to where you are right now?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And again, we're so lucky that from the very beginning, our founders, which then translated into how we do community today, years later, we just from the very beginning, we really understood how important our community was, right? So because our tools are open source, one avenue we needed is an engaged community that would contribute to our stuff, right? So because we were only 7 people, but we had 6 open source projects, we didn't have the engineering resources to contribute to all of those and then keep the technology moving forward. But by being open and having dialogue and really involving what we call our core contributors, there are community members that are contributing to our open source projects. We made them feel heard. We were engaged. We would have discussions of is this the right direction to take it? Then ended up having people for free, right, contribute to our contribute to our stuff that don't work at HashiCorp, but it's because we were open and engaged and willing to listen and wanted to build really valuable things, really valuable tools that people found valuable. Like we're so like anything that we like put out into the community, any like new tool that we launch or any feature, we spend so much time on it that people became to know like value. Whenever we did do a new release, people knew that it would be good and that we spent a lot of time. And again, that was working a lot with our community. And another thing, reason that we find like being open and engaged with our community, it really just opens up channels of feedback, right? So we have clear ideas of how we think our tools and products should work. But of course, like we're not the ones that are used, like, you know, for example, Capital One uses Vault in production, but we need their feedback telling us like how they're able to use and how they're deploying it at a scale. So again, I think the most important is like having this like valuable feedback from our community. And that's by like having these channels, these open channels of communication.
I love that. I think that's super valuable for other companies to kind of take into consideration, and especially when they're building a community and realizing that, you know, all of their hundreds of different customers, clients, partners, they all have different systems in their worlds. And so you're going to have to learn to adapt. And like, if you make the space and the channels to, you know, give your community members the space to actually give feedback and help you improve, that's like how you move forward and build actual technologies that will change the future.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of the things that my team works on now is like everything we do at HashiCorp has a purpose, right? We don't just randomly do something to try it out. For example, like that's how like the HashiCorp, we call it Hugs, the Hug program, but it's like the HashiCorp user group program started, right? Because what we found is people are hungry for knowledge. People really want to, one, have a space to connect with each other, and two, learn from each other. Is what we found from the very beginning. It's actually what we found at the first HashiConf. But the Hug program started because of that, right? Because we have, you know, it's 2018, so we have users all around the world, and so what we found is like there was like one or two meetups. Like one was in Berlin, one was in London. So we're like, oh wow, like maybe we should put more focus on building out our user group program. And what's really amazing, because we have this highly engaged and active community. So when I started 4 years ago, maybe there were 3 meetups. Today, there are 74 Hug meetups around the world, and we have over 15,000 members. And a lot of them are run by our community members, which is really cool.
That's really cool and really impressive. Like, yeah. And that's so impressive because like, when you say 1 to 2 meetups, it's insane because like a lot of people, like when they see, they're like, oh, we only have like 5 meetups or we only have 6 meetups. You literally saw 1 or 2 and was like, oh, wow, like people are meeting up about our thing. And so like, maybe we should look at this. And I think that's super important.
Yeah. Like we weren't providing any support at all, but we saw that the first HashiConf, right? So HashiCorp brought me in to do our first user conference back in 2015. We're like, okay, we have a highly engaged community, but we're not giving them a chance to meet in person, right? Like, people were, you know, talking at other conferences, writing blog posts, but we as a company weren't facilitating spaces for people to be able to meet up for, like I always refer back to, have these genuine connections and to have the chance for knowledge sharing. And the first conference we did was incredible. It sold out at 350 people. And then we had about 200 people on the wait list, right? We didn't know if people would come. And then on stage was the first time we had companies like Nike or Capital One talk about how they were using our tools in production. And we saw like a massive uptick because people trust each other, right? So if you're able to create a space where it's like, and it's not us like promoting ourselves, it's other people. It's like, hey, no, I'm here. I'm using Vault in this way. And like people trust each other more than they just trust a company being like, this is great and this is why. So we find these like Hug meetups and these big brand experiences super valuable for us. But yeah, the Hug community has been amazing, right? So we put together a program where we make it really easy to onboard new meetups, right? So if there's someone, we meet someone at a conference or someone emails us like, hey, I want to start a meetup in Sydney or in Boston. Can I do that? And we actually, we've been using Meetup Pro for the last couple of years, or maybe last 2 years. And that's been amazing, right? So we've been able to like easily onboard a new meetup and at least pay for their meetup fees. And then we also, because we're brand is a really big thing for us, we also control like what the page looks like, the type of communication. Like early days, we saw a couple of meetups. You know how you can name your members, and people were calling themselves Hashi heads, which we were like, okay, that isn't quite on brand. So I was like, so what I love about Meetup Pro is like we enable the organizer to have full control of like the meetup in that city wherever they're running it, but we're able to manage like the messaging, we're able to manage the branding. So all of the meetups around the world have the same look and feel, have the same name, but we still let like the organizer run that, right? And we just try to, we're like, okay, the London Hug hasn't done a meetup in 3 months. What's going on? And then we like reach out, we try to give them content, we try to give them speakers. So because we're really connected to like these organizers and are able to see what's going on, we've been able to like grow that program to have more meetups around the world and also make sure that they're meeting consistently, because people find these in-person events to be super valuable, right? You have two people giving talks, and then you're able to like, and there's a lot of times in a city where you're like, oh, I didn't know these people were using Hashicorp tools. So being able to have these meetups around the world and let people meet in person, it has been huge for us. So that's been a really great community program that my team built.
I love that. I really, really love that. And it's super interesting too, because kind of the thing that you mentioned about other people being able to trust each other, and like you guys had to build that from scratch. And so like one thing that I always love hearing about is, you know, what are some of the things like when you were first starting out that you guys, you know, kind of took like right on the chin? Like how did you guys mess up when you first started? I'm sure there are some interesting things that might have happened.
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned how important community is, but because we were a small startup, like it was me and another person on the marketing team back in the day, community was important, but there was no one managing all of the programs, right? There's no one like, hey, maybe we should build like a community forum, or maybe we should, like, for example, my team this year, we did core contributor packs. So these were like really curated care packs that we sent to all of our like highly engaged core contributors around the world, right? And this was like, had a golden ticket, free ticket to our brand experiences. It had a t-shirt, it had a personalized message, but that's something we just did this year, right? Versus from the very beginning, if we had someone like dedicated to community and really putting a lot of time into these different community building online and offline, I think we could be a lot farther. So that's definitely just as a whole, like, from the very beginning, I wish there was someone dedicated to community and putting together these programs in place.
That's very interesting, because I also find that a lot of times, like one of the biggest challenges when I talk to other community builders and other people at companies, it's often resources, whether that's money, time, energy. Like resources are typically what holds them back. So I'm definitely curious about what, because like, right, like you're in this startup mode, but then you still have to find ways and time to actually, you know, create this thing. It's like once you get the ball rolling, then that's when you can kind of focus resources and allocate time. So it's like a very interesting, like a chicken before the egg type of thing.
Yeah. And that's, you know, just something that's just growing pains, and we figured out. We've actually hired someone now who is our director of community, who's going to be solely focused on that, which is, I'm so excited about. She has lots of great ideas.
That's exciting. I mean, like that's got to be like a very you know, super exciting thing internally, one, but then like also from just like a career perspective, like what sorts of things is this new community, the head of community, bringing to the table? Like their experience, their background, energy. Like, could you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, she just started, so she's putting together a plan now. We could do a follow-up, or maybe you could
right.
with her. she's just trying to get the lay of the land, right? Like what's been really nice is we've already been doing community. We've already put together a lot of programs, not necessarily consistently each year or month on month, but just having someone dedicated and putting more thought is going to be great for that.
Yeah, I can only imagine what good that's going to do if it's already grown so much in the way that you guys have. So that's awesome.
No, it's
Congrats.
been great. And my team's been like, yes, community is still the most important priority for my team, but we've been focusing more on, again, what I call these brand experiences, right? It's these like in-person events from like these conferences that we're hosting around the world.
Got it. And like, I guess, wouldn't mind talk a little bit to, what sorts of things goes into a brand experience that that you've seen worked really well with your community?
Yeah. So again, really lucky that the Hashicorp founders understood the value of events and how they help with like community building and like building loyalty and strengthening relationships. So from the very beginning, they understood that. And I've mentioned how important brand is to the company. So what we find with these in-person, again, what I call brand experiences, is from the second someone walks into a space, whether it's a church we've rented or a really cool theater or even like a ballroom in a hotel, right? We want people to understand Hashicorp. Like, who is Hashicorp? How do we look, feel like who we are, right? Because to be able to build, loyalty and build a community, you really want people to understand who Hashicorp is. And I feel like with these in-person brand experiences, it humanizes Hashicorp, right? And it also creates this just like a closer emotional connection between Hashicorp and our community, right? From the second someone walks in, we just want them to like understand as like, we deeply care about them. We deeply care about the community. We deeply care about brand. And so like everything that we do at our brand experiences, like lets people know who Hashicorp is, right? Like, for example, I keep going back to these two things, and this has been from the very beginning. It's knowledge sharing and genuine connections, right? So anything that we do with community, online, offline, and our brand experiences, we always have those two things in mind. So when I say genuine connections, we think a lot about how we create spaces, right? So how do we set up furniture and plants and decor and flow? Like, how do we get our highly engaged community, right, that may have never met in person, to be able to interact, right? To be able to like really connect and feel comfortable, right? The developer community, we have found as they're very highly intelligent. Some of them are a bit introverted. So we try really hard to create spaces and quieter nooks and crannies and things we do to make everyone that's at the conference really comfortable. Like, like for example, we started to do Slack, right? So in the past, we're like, okay, well, people can just come and connect. What we find is people want to communicate in the way that they're used to, right? So either they want to talk to each other on Twitter using like the hashtag for the conference, or what we have found is Slack is amazing. So we will launch like a Slack org just for that week for that conference, right? So and what we have found is like, wow, people are like talking to each other while talks are going on. And they're like, hey, does anyone want to go meet up for dinner? So it's like people are using Slack. And again, it's understanding where your community wants to communicate versus forcing them to use another tool. And then we have found with Slack is like, then they like engage and talk to each other. And we actually found that is another way to create these genuine connections. And then people feel more comfortable in the conference. And you'll see like, we never throw parties. That's not
man.
part of, well, so
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
So again, for us, it's understanding, right? So it's like, who is Hashicorp, right? So because we believe in humility and kindness and respect and integrity, we don't think throwing a party with a band it really fits our brand, right? So we do things what we call like an evening social, but again, it's games. It's we also try to make sure that it fits the Hashicorp brand, right? So I mentioned genuine connections. We spend a lot of time thinking about that when we create these brand experiences, in-person brand experiences, and also knowledge sharing, right? So from the very, very beginning, when I did the first HashiConf, all the founders were like, we just need the screens to work and people need to be able to hear the presentations, right? So that's like the thing that we spend the most money on, the most time on. right? Because people are there to learn from each other. And again, it's because we have found the Hashicorp community is really hungry for knowledge.
That's exciting. That's very I think it's very interesting to focus on the knowledge sharing, especially because I feel like now, since there's so much knowledge out there, it's tough for people when they're looking for something new. So it's like awesome that you guys create a space for your community members to like come together and actually share knowledge about a topic that they're passionate about.
Yeah. Or a couple of other things, like for example, we did this thing. So we did a regional brand experience in Amsterdam this year. And the conference sold out maybe a month before the event. And we're like, oh no. And all of a sudden we saw like 100 people on the wait list. And we're like, okay, well, how can we extend, right? Because people really want to come, but we just like this, like we had no more space for them. So we launched something called Days Live. And what it was is we ended up live streaming the whole conference, so people paid. And we also gave them access to Slack. So they were able to watch the live stream from the comfort of their home. And we gave them access to the Slack org. So they were able to talk to attendees, and we saw them all engaging, but they were watching it from their house. So it's like, okay, if you weren't able to come to this, at least we were able to extend the reach of this event that we put a lot of time and energy into the content, and they were able to watch it from their house. And again, we did that because we were just trying to, because we're so in tune with the community wants, how the community likes to receive information. The Days Live ended up being like a pretty successful event. Or like another program, webinar program. My team launched the webinar program. And I know people go back and forth on that. But again, because we see that people are hungry for knowledge and sometimes they can't travel, like flying to, San Francisco in 2 weeks to go to our user conference, or flying to Amsterdam for Days. Like people just don't have the budget or the time for it. So our webinar program has actually been huge. We try to we do monthly webinars now, and that's something my team launched. And we're like, okay, what are people, what content are people looking for, right? And for us, we're like, okay, well, people really want to hear from our engineers because they respect them a lot. And it's the engineers that are building the tools and the products that they love and use. So we just started doing a monthly webinar program, right? Like there was like a topic on it, and we would get thousands of signups. There would be, 1,500 people watching our webinar, right? So that has a bigger reach. I mean, yeah, it's not as good as the in-person where you build trust and build relationships, but it's still that was 1,500 people that spent an hour being able to hear about how to use Vault in this way.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing too with the different ways that you've used the conferences with the live stream and now with the webinars to then just figure out different mediums that you can reach your members through. I think that's super impressive, and it's definitely a framework that other people can look up to and say oh wow, look at the ways that they're meeting their members and developers where they are. Instead of having them all download something, just let them log into another workspace on Slack. It's a normal thing to them. So
yeah,
I love that.
That's my advice to anyone, either starting in community management or at a new role. To spend a lot of time understanding your community, right? How they want to be communicated with, the tools that they're using, where they're hanging out, right? So I feel like some companies make the mistake of okay, I want to build a community around my product, right? And so then they try and they force people to use the tools and different things that they launch versus really spending time okay, well, maybe there's already an active community and maybe we just instead need to reach out to them in the places that they're already talking and then doing the things that they find valuable, right? So you'll find nothing we do at Hashicorp is, or we try not to make it self-serving, right? So everything we do has a lot of thought into it, and it has a lot of thought of how is our community going to react to this? Is this something that they will find valuable, right? So we spend a lot of time doing that stuff. We wouldn't have launched Days Live, if it wasn't useful, or we wouldn't and of course it's okay to try things. Sometimes things fail, but everything we do, we put a lot of thought into and make sure that this is how our community wants to be communicated with. This is where the tools that our community wants to use. And that's, again, because we are really closely engaged with our community and just listening to them.
It's one of those funny things that we always hear. It's like, well, we have two ears and one mouth.
Yeah. But again, I mean, this stuff is really important, right? Being engaged with your community, it builds strong relationships. It opens up channels for feedback, creates like customer loyalty, establishes trust and credibility. Like all of these things are super important because your reach as a company is only so far, right? Versus a company having a community that's really engaged, that really loves you, like that reaches so much farther. Like we now all the time see people people talking at conferences and mentioning HashiCorp. We see people on Twitter like, hey, have you like checked out HashiCorp's tool, blah, blah, blah. So, and I think that's because from the very beginning, when we started, like community was the most important thing for us. And we're seeing that years later.
Yeah, and that's even one of the things that I love thinking about. It's just like showing the true value of community, just like realizing that like together as like a tribe, as like an army of
Yeah.
people that are, together, coming together around some sort of, goal, idea, purpose. But then realize literally how much greater of a force that is when it can be distributed across the world in so many different countries, and just realize that like you can only do so much as a brand. And if your community becomes essentially larger than your brand voice, then you almost have like this like golden unicorn in your hands.
Yeah, Travis, that's so well said. Definitely.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm trying to think like I know we kind of like went I think we went really efficiently with like time and like getting through a lot of the things that we want to talk about, but I did want to open it up to see if there was any other topics, takeaways, ideas that you might want to discuss, talk about, while we still have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so much we could cover. Yeah. So I mentioned that my team we also do like experiential marketing, which is interesting to think about, like where community management is heading and where and so I've spent a lot of time thinking about like, okay, what does experiential marketing mean, and what does it mean like in terms of community, right? And this is something that we talked about earlier, how important it is for a company to really understand their brand, right? Because if they understand who they are, who they're marketing to, their messaging, it's then translates, and then the community understands it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something before, like when I did the first HashiConf, for example, like I just rented a theater, I got some chairs, some food, and I was like, here you go, right? But what I didn't realize is how important people being able to experience the brand at these, like in these physical spaces, like how important that is, right? Like I think that like helps strengthens a company's brand, and also like, and then it strengthens like people's like connection to your brand, right?
Totally. I think also it's funny. I spoke with Priya Parker on one of my other episodes, and one of the things that she mentioned was the importance of being able to, run and hold a transformative gathering, but also creating alternative worlds. So like I kind of got this picture in my head when it just took me through that, of like Hashicorp creating an alternative world for all of their community members every time they experience the Hashicorp brand. Now I'm just like, ooh,
Ooh,
that's
that's
that
fun.
sounds cool, right? So yeah, I like that. I guess could you like what type of world, like what does that look like being someone that has not yet attended a HashiCorp event? I'm like, what does the HashiCorp world look like? Like, I feel like it's really
And
interesting.
where are you based? Are you in Austin or New York?
Yeah, I'm in New York.
Oh, you're in New York. Okay, so am I. I was going to invite you to. We're doing our big conference, our big brand experience in 2 weeks. What does the HashiCorp world look like? Well, so my
I
team.
know, weird question.
No, I love that, right? So, and again, it goes back to like, who is HashiCorp? What is the brand? What does it look, touch, feel, taste like, right? And so my team and I, like, for example, so in 2 weeks, we're doing our big conference. And we've thought through everything, right? From the second someone walks into the Fairmont Hotel, what music's going to be playing? What are they going to see? What does the signage look like? What does the directional signage? We have playlists. We created separate playlists for each of the breakout rooms, right? We created what we call a Hashi Cafe, so people can go get espresso drinks, and we created little spaces where people can sit and drink their brand, can drink coffee out of branded Hashicorp mugs. We created all these different spaces. Like there's one space called the Gaming Lounge, right, where we rented a bunch of different video games, and people can go and play together and interact together. So because we understand the community and because we understand the Hashicorp brand, you feel that, right? We created all these different spaces and these different things that allow the people to connect and to interact. We have a space called the reboot room, right? Where it's just a very quiet room where there's chargers and it's darker and people can just take a moment, right? And again, it's because we understand how our community, how they think, how they function, and that enables us to then create these experiences for them.
That's amazing. I feel like it literally just brings you back to movies, to where you imagine this giant house and then there are all these different rooms and there's all these different experiences in all these different rooms, and you guys are literally creating that multiple times a year for your members. I think that's
exactly
really, really impressive.
And it's been fun. So I moved to New York last January, and I find New York to be really inspiring, and it's actually inspired a lot of, because yes, in the end of the day, I'm organizing brand experiences for technology company, right? But I think being able to, and New York does a really good job of it. It's what are these cool experience? New York has these Then She Fell and these cool comedy clubs and these cool events that are experiences, right? And so I've tried to take the events that I've attended in New York that have nothing to do apart from them using technology for their experiences and translate that into our brand experiences.
That's really smart, because a lot of times too, and I think you'll probably attest to this, is that the Hashicorp community in New York is yes, they're the same humans, yes, they still love Hashicorp, but just culturally, they're a little bit different than let's say your Hashicorp users that might be in Austin.
Oh,
or
definitely.
your Hashicorp users that might be in California. So I think that's super important to be able to take that. And also, one other thing that I'm thinking about is when you are looking for local leaders in different cities to run some of these user groups or these Hashicorp meetups, how do you find them? What sorts of things jump out from a person that says, oh wow, Travis would be great at running this user group?
I'll definitely answer that question, but I really loved your point, Travis, about understanding that your community is different in different cities and different regions, right? I think a lot of time people just assume okay, hey, I have a global community and they're all the same, but they're not, right? They can be in different stages of adoption and different stages of knowledge. So we do, at least for our brand experiences, we change up the format, we change up the style, right? So the type of brand experience that we do in Amsterdam was very different than the one we did in London versus in Austin versus in San Francisco, right? So it's understanding that these events will attract a global audience, but a lot of time it's local as well. So we try to really keep in mind, okay, this is where this community is at, and this is the type of program or event or whatever we should put in place for that community in that region.
Yeah, no, I love that too, and it's really interesting too, because you have to be 7 Yanas, right? You have to literally transform every time you go into a room. So it's really impressive when you can take so many different pieces of culture and still successfully scale a network across the world. That's I feel like people really forget how really hard that is. It's not the easiest thing to just spin up, new communities in different parts of the world when you're actually located in New York City.
Yeah. And I find it interesting. I'll sometimes talk to community managers and I'm well, do you go to conferences? Are you on Twitter? I sometimes don't understand people that haven't gone out and really traveled and gone to the different events and just because you need to be meeting. My team and I, we are with our community members in some capacity or another at least a couple times a month, right?
in real life.
In real life, because like it's like we can't just be, and I find this with like engineering too, right? And this is why I love that our engineers are so connected to our community, like, and active in like GitHub and Google groups and stuff. Like, you need to understand what your community is saying and like where they're at, right? Like, you can't just put out a program and not have spent time with them.
Right. I think that's interesting too. What you going back kind of on the same topic, but when you mentioned that, like when you have different communities in different parts of the world that are different stages.
Yeah.
How do you I don't know how to put this, but how do you like tell what stage a community is in? Like, do you guys have a framework? Do you guys measure this? Like, how do you tell? And then from that, like, what sorts of different things do you do depending upon what stage the community's in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so a couple of different things. One, like we can see, I guess we can see how many members are in like the hug community. We work really closely with our sales team because they are meeting with the community on a daily basis. What other ways can we tell? You also know, like in terms of technology, you also know which markets are in what phase, right? Like West Coast, they're early adopters and they already know about our stuff, versus Central, they're more behind. So you also know just in like our community in terms of the different regions where they're at, and then also for us, like gauging like the number of downloads and how active people are in those different cities or regions. So there's a couple different ways that we can gauge. Like, for example, we did an event last year in London, right? And we had originally done this format for our Hashi Days that had like something called open spaces. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it's you put a board out all day and people put up like different topics that they want to talk about. And then you do these like 2 30-minute sessions. And like those have different topics, right? You have a leader and you have people just talking. What we found in like the UK, that community more wants to absorb information and something like open spaces where it's open dialogue and asking people to connect wouldn't work there, right? So if we didn't have a pulse on like what the tech scene is like there, what the developer community is like there, we wouldn't have found out that, hey, this type of format, this conference format doesn't work for an audience like that.
That's super interesting.
And then
that's very interesting.
Yeah. And then that also goes back to your question about like how we find hug organizers. So again, because my team is really active in the community, like we go to a lot of meetups and events, we are like really engaged with the different folks, right? So we'll meet someone at some conference and they're like, hey, I love Hashicorp. I've been this happened to us in Austin. I love Hashicorp. I've been wanting to start an Austin like Hashicorp user group. How do I do it, right? And so then we have a whole onboarding doc. We have a whole process. And then we also see people like how engaged they are on GitHub, how engaged they are on Twitter. Like you can see like have they written blogs about us, have they spoken about us. So we do try to find the folks that are really engaged and love us to run our hug meetups around the world.
Awesome. I think that's a really smart strategy just to like get it's like literally teaching it's like teaching a teacher, but like they're teaching each other.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, my takeaway is like community building should be like ingrained in the company from the very beginning, right? It gives you a pulse on like how your products or tools are doing in the market. And if you're like open and engaged with them, it gives you a lot of like open and honest feedback. Builds trust, builds loyalty. So community building is super important for any company to do.
I love that. I think that's a super powerful message for brands that are out there that are like in their 7 to 10 employee stages.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily want to or know the importance of putting resources and budget and energy and time behind community building. And so I think that Hashicorp is a perfect example of like when done right, like your community can help you grow and achieve and solve problems that you would never have been able to do had you not focused on those members and those people.
Yeah, well said. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Jana, thanks so much for, hopping on with me today. I really enjoyed, your time and, your insights and your thoughts. For people that I guess like who would you invite to like reach out to you? What types of people like are you looking to connect with? Because that's one thing I like to do here as well
Yeah.
is just find a way to get, the people that I talk with and other people connected to, solve problems.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, community management's pretty new, right? Relative. So I'm always like open to talk to other folks that are doing community management, that have ideas, that want to collaborate, that or have any questions for me. I believe that, we're doing community management. We should all support each other and help elevate this craft. So it's super important. So I'd love to talk to other people that are doing similar stuff.
Awesome. I love it. Well, I'll make sure I'll do my best to put you in touch with those people. And thanks again for hopping on today. I really loved it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. This was lovely.
Thanks for listening to the Community Builder Podcast. If you received an ounce of value from this podcast, share it with your friends. Oh yeah, don't forget to leave me a 5-star review. I need those. Remember, each perfectly laid brick moves you one step closer to building your community.